name is Cody. I am here building beds with all these fine people because my wife signed me up to do this on a Saturday. I work at the school district, KUSD, and I'm here building beds for students that maybe need it.
I'm building beds because I love the community we live in, 262.
I'm building beds today to give back to the community, bring happiness to somebody who needs it.
We're showing people who God is and how we're called to serve as a human and be there for each other.
Hey, Great Lakes Church, I just wanted to say thank you for all the years that we've been involved with Sleep in Heavenly Peace. Our goal today is 262 beds because we're in the 262 area code. We're on track to meet that goal, so thank you for everybody that came to help volunteer. We appreciate you guys very much.
Man, we love Sleep in Heavenly Peace. They do amazing things, and we just think it's such a privilege for us to get to partner with them. I was told today that over the last 7 years that they've been in town, they have built and delivered, they'll be on pace by the end of this year, 3,000 beds for kids. Isn't that incredible? Man. So if you're new to Great Lakes and you're thinking about what does it look like to partner with this church financially and give, or if you've been on the fence about that, wondering, well, what do they actually do with it? You just got to see it. We love partnering with places in our community that make our community better, make our community a little bit more like heaven. And so rest assured that every penny you ever give here goes to helping people find and follow Jesus. And sometimes it starts in really practical ways, like making sure they have a bed to sleep on at night. So if you're in that place where you would be willing to help us in that way, I would love it. You can give at the stations in the building. You can give online. There's a prepaid envelope in front of you. Scan the QR code. That'll take you to our website. You can get all that set up if you'd like. We would so appreciate it. I thought we would start our time together this morning with me giving you a life hack. In case you are ever in a situation where you would like to make the room very awkward and uncomfortable in a very short amount of time, and I happen to be in the room with you, just have someone ask me what I do for a living. That's going to make everybody really uneasy. And they're going to think twice about why they chose to come to this particular get-together, whether it's a party or an Uber ride. So a couple weeks ago, I got to be at a conference in New Jersey/New York, and we landed in Newark. I flew with a bunch of other pastors, like 3 other pastors from Aguanago that we've become friends with in our network of churches. And so we flew in together, we split the Uber, and we're driving, and I got to sit in the front seat because all of this doesn't fit in the back seat. And so I'm having a conversation with the driver, and it was going amazing. We were practically best friends 15 minutes into it. I learned that he was born in Syria, and that when he was 16, they moved to New York, and he started telling me all about the city and the bridges and the boroughs and all of the things. And the entire time, I am literally praying, God, please don't let him ask me. Because if he asks me, the tenor of this conversation is going to change. If you've ever been to New York, you know that the ride from the airport to anywhere is long. And so we were about 15 minutes in, feeling really good about this, and he finally asks, so what brings you to New York? I said, because I thought I was really smart. I said, we're in town for a conference. He says, what kind of conference? I said, one for work. Because I thought I was being really good, But I could only hold him off so long. Finally, he says, well, what do you guys do for work? And it's really quiet, because every other pastor in the car was like, who's telling him? And so I said, we're actually all pastors. And his response was literally, oh, shh. And I said, sir, please don't kick us out of this car. We're Midwestern people. We will not survive in this city alone. It ended up being totally fine, and we had a really good conversation. It didn't get into anything real hairy or difficult. But I realized in that interaction what happens in most interactions like that. I get freaked out, not so much about what I believe or what I'm going to say, more about what they're going to say, and more about what they're going to feel and what they're going to think. Like when we got out of that car, who did he call? Because he probably called somebody and said, you're never going to believe, I just had 5 pastors in my car. What are the odds of that? I find myself obsessing about how they're going to respond to what I'm about to say to them instead of thinking just more about what I am going to respond with or what I'm going to say or what I believe. It's kind of interesting. Have you ever done that? Have you ever been in a situation like, you don't have to answer out loud because I know we're in church and you don't want to admit that sometimes it's uncomfortable to talk about church stuff. But my guess is you've had moments where you've nerved up or you've clammed up or you've geared up because faith was brought up. And you were not freaking out about what you were going to say. You too, like me, were freaking about what they would say, which means the entire thing does not ride on you, it rides on them, right? That's the whole equation. What will they respond with? What will they come back with? So we do this thing that I call gearing up, and it looks a little like the final scene in the movie The Matrix. If you've ever seen it, Neo, the main character, and someone on his team, they gear up for this final battle by putting on sashes that have all kinds of bullets on them and belts around here with all kinds of bullets, and then they have guns that go into every pocket, and then they have guns in their hand and guns in the bags and guns in the bags, and they carry in the bags, and it's crazy. They destroy an entire lobby of a place with all this weaponry. In my head, that's what's about to happen. We are about to go to battle. We are about to go to war, and so I've got to get ready to fire off a bunch of good Christian stuff so that I can win this thing. I assume it's going to be an argument. I make it an argument before it actually becomes one. And the problem with thinking that way is that it defines the dynamic before there is a dynamic. It defines the conversation before the conversation actually starts. And it shifts why you're saying things in the first place. So if you were to look up argument in the dictionary, you would see this definition: a reason given with the aim of persuading others that an action or idea is right or wrong. This is why in a few weeks at your Thanksgiving table, there will be a few ground rules. We don't talk politics. We don't talk religion, and we don't ask each other what each other makes, right? Because we know it's going to turn into this back and forth where someone is trying to persuade us that they're right and we're wrong. Or we're going to do it where we're trying to get them to understand they are so foolish and we are so wise. And it becomes this game. An argument makes it about one and only one thing for us in our minds and hearts. 3-letter word, W-I-N. How am I going to win? So when someone asks me what I do for a living, I naturally, in a matter of seconds, I start thinking around all the arguments for the existence of God, the argument for why Jesus is God himself, and the argument for why I have forgiveness and I can have a new life, and all of these kinds of things, so that they go, oh my gosh, I am changing my life. You're the smartest person I've ever met. You win. Here's my white flag. Like that tends to be how we look at this. But we shouldn't. I'm going to go so far as to encourage you today to no longer argue for your faith. If you're watching online, do not clip that and put that on social media because I'm going to explain. But that's how we were raised if we grew up in the church, right? We need to learn how to argue for the validity of our faith. I don't think you should argue anymore. I think you should do something else. I think you should offer instead of argue. I think you should stop worrying so much about what their response is going to be and simply offer them an alternative. Offer them something different. It's up to them whether they receive it or not. I don't know if you've ever considered this, but in a few months when we exchange gifts, the person that you give a gift to does not have to open it. It's their choice. Now, most of us would say, well, if you're not opening it, I'm not giving it. And that betrays a little bit of what's really going on in our heart. And I think when it comes to having discussions about what it is that we believe, who it is that we follow, we should think of it more as I'm going to offer some ideas and some concepts, and you get to decide whether or not you agree. I'm not on the hook for that, though. I'm on the hook for making the offering in the first place. And anytime I think about this, I always think about one person in particular. His name is Ezekiel. And if you're familiar with the Old Testament, you know that he has his own book. But Ezekiel started off as a priest. And then once Israel got exiled to Babylon, he kind of transitions into a prophet. And you go, every time we talk about Israel these days, it's about exile. There were a lot of them. One of them was to Persia. That was Esther last week. The week before, we talked about to Babylon with Nehemiah. Ezekiel is kind of a contemporary of Nehemiah. He's more on the front end of that exile. And so God sits him down and he says, I've got a job for you. I've got a mission for you. And it is to be my mouthpiece. It's to be my representative to my people. I'm inviting you to speak on my behalf. Now, I think all of you should read Ezekiel at some point, like today, later this week. Just don't read it before bed, because it's really crazy weird, especially in the first chapter. So at the risk of taking up way more time on this than I should, I want to read you a passage just so that you know exactly what Ezekiel is dealing with when he's asked by God to go speak for God. Okay? This is where we're going to pick up. In the first chapter of Ezekiel, this is what we read. From the center of the cloud came 4 living beings that looked human, except that each had 4 faces and 4 wings. It gets weirder. Each had a human face in the front, the face of a lion on the right side, the face of an ox on the left side, and the face of an eagle at the back. This sounds like a fever dream. Right? You are tempted when you're reading the beginning of Ezekiel to go, he must have had access to some psychedelic substances, because this is bizarre. And as you read on, it just gets weirder. These creatures are riding around on a vehicle of sorts whose wheels are covered in eyes. And I don't mean the letter. I mean the eyeballs. They are covered in eyeballs. It is so bizarre and so important. And there are all kinds of books that try to explain why it's so important, because they're pulling it apart, and this is to express God's majesty, and I think all of that's good and true. But I think there's an underlying reason that this is shared at the beginning. Because it's weird. Because it's weird. And for you and I, in the 21st century, as followers of Jesus, there are parts of our faith, there are parts of our beliefs that are weird. They're really weird, and we should acknowledge that. We should be willing to say that out loud. Have you ever thought about this? Every single Sunday and every single Wednesday, a group of people come together in a big room, and they all face the same direction, and they sing songs out loud to a God that they cannot see and they cannot touch. That's weird. Some of us give a percentage of our paycheck every month to someone else. Some of us give a percentage of our free time up every week for someone else. We read a collection of documents that we call the Bible that are more than 2,000 years old, and we give it authority in our lives. We believe that the King of the universe was born of a virgin, died, and came back to life 3 days later, all on his own. That's weird. And here's why I think that's important for us to acknowledge. Because when they know that you know what you know is weird, they know it's real. I'll say that again. When they know what you know, when I got myself messed up. When they know that you know what you know is weird, they know it's real. Because if we were making it up, we'd leave the weird parts out. Think about it. If we were trying to make up some kind of mechanism to modify people's behavior, we would make sure it's polished and perfect. You do not find that anywhere in the scriptures. You find people that mess up all the time, people that get it wrong all the time, and all sorts of really weird things. So let's just say that out loud. I think that takes some of the teeth out of the discussion. When we're willing to just say, this is weird. I get it, it's weird. They have less ammunition for us to be afraid of. We've called the elephant out in the room. And then when God says, I want you to take the weird that you just saw, and I want you to share what I'm about to tell you with the people of Israel, God says some very interesting things. But first, the commissioning. This is what he says back to the book of Ezekiel. They are a stubborn and hard-hearted people. Just so you know what you're getting yourself into. Just so you know who I'm sending you to. But I'm sending you to say to them, this is what the sovereign Lord says. What a kind of an unbelievable privilege, right? Ezekiel is being told by God that he is going to speak for God. We don't talk politics here. We're not going to start today. But I love political shows, not the news shows, like the fake politics shows, the ones where like things actually work. And I love watching them. And every once in a while, there will be a character on these shows that gets a cool title, and it's something along the lines of the special envoy. It's a weird word that we don't use in a whole lot of other contexts, but an envoy is someone that goes and speaks on behalf of someone else. They represent them to people that may not be in the room with the person sending the envoy, but the envoy is as good as being in the room with the person. And so God comes to Ezekiel and he says, I want you to be my envoy. These people are not going to listen to me. So I'm going to send you, and you're going to tell them what I'm saying, and that's going to be as good as them hearing directly from me. That's crazy to me. And you might go, that's such an Old Testament thing, right? That's like a couple thousand years ago, 500 years before Jesus. This doesn't really apply to us, except God doesn't really ever change. And he's always been about using people to represent him in all kinds of contexts. So if you fast forward a little over 500 years from the time of Ezekiel, Jesus has come, died, resurrected, gone to heaven, and Paul comes along, and he sits down and he writes a letter to a bunch of Christians in a town called Corinth, and listen to what he says, and ask yourself, does this sound familiar? He goes on to say in this paragraph, so we are Christ's ambassadors. God is making his appeal through us. We speak for Christ. What if you are Jesus' envoy? What if you are his representative? Whatever context you find yourself in, work, home, neighborhood, pickup basketball league, hobby group, is it possible that God sent someone for someone else, and you are the someone sent? And all you're really responsible for is telling them who God is, representing God. Now, when you read Ezekiel, he comes representing a lot of judgment and a lot of consequence for their sins. And thank goodness we live on the other side of Jesus, who said, here's how I want you to represent me. Love one another. That's how they're going to know. Love one another well, like I've loved you. So I want us to start wrestling with, what if I was in that Uber car in the middle of New York City simply to represent Jesus to this guy? That changes the dynamic before the dynamic is even there. That pulls the teeth out of the fear of what the response will be, because I recognize that I'm there just to represent. I don't necessarily have to argue or convince. And here's why I say that. Because when he uses the word ambassadors, that takes envoy to a next level, because innate in the definition is sent. They represent, but they're also being sent out to others to speak on behalf, to show on behalf, to display. Jesus would call it being a city on a hill, so that everyone would know who God is. That's what we're responsible for. So for Ezekiel, when God is calling him into his employment, so to speak, he gets pretty explicit with that idea. All you are really responsible for, Ezekiel, is representing me to the people. How they respond is not how you are being graded. This is what he says, jumping back to Ezekiel. Listen to my words carefully for yourself. Pause. That is so important, because the number one critique of all Christians in the world is that we're hypocrites. We do not practice what we preach. We are really good at telling everybody else how they should live their life and how they should believe and how they should behave, and we do not do it for ourselves. And God says, be careful to make sure that what you're about to say is sunk into your own heart and your own soul before you go spewing it out to anybody else. Jesus would say, make sure you get the plank out of your own eye before you point out the speck in someone else's. So God says, listen, don't go running off at the mouth before you fully embrace and understand what I'm telling you. And then he says, then go to your people in exile and say, this is what the sovereign Lord says. Do this whether they listen or not. The last part is so cool to me, and it gets repeated over and over and over again. In fact, 3 times in just 16 sentences. So if you can last through the weird first chapter of Ezekiel, and you get into the second and third, you will hear God say to Ezekiel 3 different times, whether they listen or not. In other words, their listening is not your problem. Your problem is saying it. Their response is not your problem. You representing is. And to me, these words, whether they listen or not, is what allows me to shift from I'm going to argue with people to I'm going to offer to people. All I'm supposed to do is show up with here's an alternative way. Here's an alternative view. Here's an alternative idea. Here's something new. And Paul would say something very similar, slightly different, but similar, where he comes back to here's what's really most important. These are his words back to 2 Corinthians. If it seems we're crazy, it's to bring glory to God. And if we're in our right minds, it's for your benefit. Either way, Christ's love controls us. The response of people to what they say does not really matter to Paul. Some are going to think they're nuts. He's okay with that, because his job's not to make sure that they don't think he's nuts. Some of them are going to think they made a good point and maybe listen further and maybe make some changes in their life, maybe even adopt Jesus as their king. But the point for Paul is that Christ's love controls us. That's the whole thing. How it's received, how it's perceived is irrelevant. We are just going to do what Jesus has told us to do. We are just going to represent regardless of the response. We're okay with whatever the response is. So again, that starts to change how these moments where someone asks you about your religion or your faith or your church or what you believe about X, Y, or Z. And we tend to think we've got to gear up and get ready. And over again, whether it's God talking to Ezekiel or Paul talking to us who heard it from Jesus, what they say back, don't let that stop you from representing well. Be careful to show up and be Jesus in the room. Now, what God says to Ezekiel next is really intense. And I just want to warn you before we read it, you're probably not going to like what you hear. It's going to be one of those passages where you're like, I kind of wish that wasn't in the Bible. Or you'll be tempted to go, I'm just writing that off as like Old Testament craziness, doesn't really apply to me. We'll talk about it after we read it, but this is what God says to Ezekiel. If I warn the wicked, but you fail to deliver the warning, they will die in their sins, and I will hold you responsible for their deaths. In other words, their blood is on your hands if they didn't know. He says, if you warn them and they refuse to repent and keep on sinning, they'll die in their sins all the same, but you will have saved yourself because you obeyed me. Saving yourself does not come because they agreed. Saving yourself does not come because they decided to come to church with you and because of your invitation. Obedience, just showing up and being who Jesus has called us to be. The reason I love this passage in Ezekiel is because God is so clear about the rubric. When it comes to the assignment, he's clear about what we're graded on. If you remember back to college or high school or middle school, when you were assigned a big paper or a big project, teachers worth their salt would give you a rubric. And what they were doing was showing you this is what you will be graded on. If you want to get a good grade, do these 5, 10, 15 things really well, and you'll get the good grade. And I remember thinking, this means I could misspell my own name. But as long as I do these things right, I'm going to get a good grade. And that is factually how it worked. And so I read this, whether it's Ezekiel or Paul, and I go, God's saying, here's what the grade is. Show up. Represent me. And again, the good news is, Jesus said, here's how you represent me. Here's how they'll know. Love each other. So show up and do that. Show up and talk about what you believe as an offering, not as an argument. That's what, because the argument makes it sound like part of the rubric is, and they believe, or they respond well, or they want more, or they go to church, or whatever. That part is up to him. Jesus said, I'll build my church. I just need you to show up and represent me everywhere you go so that they'll know who I am. And if you're sitting there wondering, well, what is it then that I'm really offering? If I'm not arguing for my faith, what am I offering with my faith? And the good news is Ezekiel spells that out, and so does Paul. And it's so good. Listen to what God says to Ezekiel. This is the message that he's supposed to give to the Israelites. I will give you a new heart, and I will put a new spirit in you. I will take away your stony, stubborn heart and give you a tender, responsive heart. And I will put my spirit in you so that you will follow my decrees and be careful to obey my regulations. And then Paul goes on to say this in 2 Corinthians. This means that anyone who belongs to Christ has become a new person. The old life is gone, a new life has begun. And all of this is a gift, an offering from God, who brought us back to himself through Christ. And God has given us this task of reconciling people to him. not convincing, not arguing, not beating up, reconciling. Here's what I'm convinced of. People know what the old has gotten them. This is why you and I can show up and say, can I offer you something new? They know their old life has gotten them heartache because their old life is often their current life. It's gotten them heartache, it's gotten them disappointment, it's gotten them loneliness, feeling meaningless. It's birthed frustration for them after frustration. They know. In fact, most of the time, I don't need to tell anybody what's going wrong in their life. They already feel it. All I need to offer them is an alternative. They know the stony, cold heart thing. They walked into the room with it. Some of us walked into this room with it. And what Jesus offers us, what God has been offering his people for thousands and thousands of years, is something new. That's why we can focus on offering over arguing. Because I'm not trying to convince you of something. I'm trying to give you something. I'm trying to show you something by representing the one who I believe has sent me into this conversation or into this room or into this Uber car. The problem is, we just naturally, there is a gravitational pull back towards argument. And if you were to go home today and pull out your Webster dictionary and look up the word argument, you'd see the first definition I gave you. And then you'd see the second one, and it's actually the second one that feeds and fuels our fear of having these kinds of discussions. And this is how it reads. An exchange of diverging or opposite views, typically a heated or angry one. Some of us enjoy the anger part. That's why we love social media. We can just throw gospel grenades at people and then log off. We think that this is what we're called to, but I just don't see Jesus doing that, and I didn't see Paul doing it. In fact, when Paul shows up in a place called Mars Hill, and he's standing in a temple where there's all kinds of false gods and idols, and they have hundreds of them so that they don't miss anybody. In fact, they even have one that says, to an unknown God. I find it fascinating that Paul doesn't start with disproving everything they believe about all these other gods. Here's how he starts. Can I offer you an idea about this unknown God? Can I offer a concept that would say you can know him intimately? He doesn't start with a baseball bat. He starts with this new concept and offers it gently and lovingly and peacefully, because he knows he's on Mars Hill as a representative, as an ambassador, as the special envoy of Jesus himself. So he will represent his tone and his posture to the people he's talking with. And we need to get to the place where we see what we're bringing as actually good news, not scary news, not bad news, not gotcha news, good news. Because if you think all the way back to the beginning of the first century, on the night we'll celebrate in a couple months, when the announcement came from the angels to the shepherds, they acted as the first ambassadors of Jesus. And listen to what their message was. Don't be afraid. Here's why. I bring you good news that will bring great joy to all people. I bring you good news. And that news is so good, it's going to fill you with joy. And it is readily available to all people. that's what we bring. That's what we offer. That's who we are, because that's who he is. And we are ambassadors. So I want to challenge you to ask yourself a simple but difficult question every morning when you wake up in the morning. And I'm only challenging you to do this because I need somebody to be doing it with me and feeling the same frustration I'm feeling. Here's the question. How would an ambassador of Jesus navigate today? How would an ambassador, how would someone who represents Jesus, who speaks for Jesus, who thinks and does like Jesus, what would they do today? And I mean all 960-ish waking minutes of your day. The first exchange in the kitchen around the coffee pot, the drive into work, the first meeting you find yourself in, the first class that you sit through, all the way until you are kissing a kid goodnight or kissing a roommate or kissing a whoever goodnight and you're going to bed. Every one of those minutes, how would an ambassador of Jesus navigate each of those exchanges? Now, if you're anything like me, you are going to go, that is a really good question, and I should ask myself that every day. And then we'll say you're dismissed and you'll leave and you'll forget all about it. So I want to offer a reminder, again, because I need one. And here's how we're going to do this. If you scan that QR code, it'll bring up a text message for you to send in. Or you can put in the 2-bar, this phone number, 262-500-3155. And you're going to text the word REMIND. And as soon as you send it, you should get a reply from us that says you're all set to go. We will remind you every day for the next 7 days at 7 a.m. to ask yourself, what would an ambassador of Jesus do today? Now, here's the deal. If you are not an early riser, please don't sign up. You're going to hate us because it's coming at 7 a.m., ready or not. But we want to make it easy because, again, I'll do the same thing. I'll walk out of here. I'll forget about it. I won't think about it. And then I'll get all the way to next Sunday and be like, oh, man, I forgot to think about what it means to be a representative of Jesus. So, again, and if you don't have time to do this, email us. We'll get you the link, and you can sign up later today. But we want to just be practical in how we come alongside of you and help you start kind of immersing your brain in this. And the band's going to come out, and they're going to help us start this by offering a song that we can use as a prayer, maybe even a declaration. And I love this song. We'll keep this up here for another minute so that you can scan it if you need to. The main line of the song goes something like this. My eyes are locked on the King. And here's the thing about being a representative. You have to be in lockstep with the one who you are representing. To do your job well, to be the envoy, you need to be in lockstep with the one you're going to tell about. And so my hope is that we'll use the last couple minutes of our time together to start aiming our heart and our soul and our mind in that direction. I'm going to be locked on the King so that in every interaction I have, I can be his ambassador well. Like Ezekiel was to Israel, like Paul was to all of those churches, like we should be to everybody that we meet. And here's what you're going to find. The more you do that, the more you're going to realize these interactions about your faith are not about what you can get from the person you're talking to. More often than not, the thing we want to get from them is a victory or their defeat. But Jesus didn't come and get anything from us. This is not who he was. Jesus came and did something for us, gave something for us, offered us something for us. So when you find yourself in those interactions, keep your eyes locked on the King, represent him well, and offer something for them that is good and new. Let's pray. Heavenly Father, thank you for loving us enough to send your Son. Thank you for loving us enough to give us examples over and over again of people who understood what it meant to represent you. all of you. We are going to, within 24 hours, be in situations where we have opportunities to represent you well or poorly. Will you help us to have our eyes locked on you? Think like ambassadors all day, every day, so that at the end of the day, we go back and go, I was a good envoy. I was a good representative for my King today. In Jesus' name, amen. Will you stand and we'll sing together?
There's a place I retreat, shake the dust off of my feet. The noise turns down, I hear you speak. It's a different kind of peace. It's a deep calling to deep. Sit down across from you. Commune just like